in the shadows of crime, where trails go cold and questions remain unanswered. Some stories refuse to stay buried. Today I will guide you through the darkness, and tonight we will follow the evidence wherever it leads. May 14, 2008, 2:30 a.m. In rural Minnesota. A father listens helplessly as his 19-year-old son walks alone through the darkness, lost somewhere in the endless farmland. They've been on the phone for 47 minutes. The boy is trying to find his way home. Then, cutting through the silence of the prairie night, two words that would haunt a family forever. Oh shit. The line goes dead. Brandon Swanson vanishes into the Minnesota darkness, and despite one of the largest search efforts in state history, he has never been found. No body. No trace. No answers. What happened in those final seconds? What did Brandon see that made him curse into the phone before disappearing forever? Brandon Victor Swanson should have had his whole life ahead of him. At 19, he was a Dean's List student at Minnesota West Community College, just months away from transferring to a 4-year university. Standing 5 feet 6 inches with brown hair and brown eyes, Brandon was the kind of son every parent dreams of, responsible, close to his family, and trusted. He lived in Marshall, Minnesota, a quiet farming town of 13,000 people where everyone knows everyone. This wasn't the kind of place where young men simply vanish without a trace. May 14th started like any other night. Brandon attended an end-of-semester party in Canby, about 30 miles from home. Friends later said he seemed sober when he left around midnight for the familiar drive back to Marshall, a route he'd taken countless times. But somewhere in the darkness of southwestern Minnesota, everything went wrong. At 1:54 a.m., Brandon's 1998 Pontiac Grand Am slid off a gravel road into a ditch. The car wasn't damaged, just stuck. Like any college kid would do, he called his parents for help. "I'm stuck in a ditch between Marshall and Lind," he told his father, Brian. "Can you come get me?" Brian and his wife Annette immediately jumped in their car and drove toward Lind, a small town about 7 miles southwest of Marshall. But as they drove the main highway between the two towns, something disturbing became clear. They couldn't find Brandon anywhere. Despite being exactly where Brandon said he was, they saw no sign of him or his car. They drove with their four-way flashers on. Brandon couldn't see them. They honked their horn repeatedly. Brandon heard nothing. "I can see the lights of Lind," Brandon insisted. But somehow, father and son, talking on the phone in real time, couldn't locate each other. This is where the mystery begins. Growing frustrated, Brandon made a decision that would seal his fate. "I'll walk toward the lights and meet you guys," he said. His father stayed on the phone to guide him. For the next 47 minutes, Brian Swanson listened to his son's footsteps on gravel, his heavy breathing, and his growing confusion about where he was. Brandon was walking into the darkness, alone. And he was walking in the wrong direction. The details of that final conversation are haunting. Brandon walked for nearly an hour through the rural Minnesota night. He told his father he was crossing fences, walking through fields, passing what sounded like farm equipment. His voice grew increasingly strained and confused. "Dad, I think I'm really turned around here," he said at one point. Brian tried to stay calm, but panic was setting in. His son was clearly lost, and they had been searching for almost 2 hours in the dark. Then, at exactly 2:30 a.m., everything changed. Brandon's voice cut through the night. "I'm climbing over a fence. I think I see." A brief pause. Then, sharp and alarmed, "Oh shit." The line went dead. Brian immediately called back. The phone rang once, then went to voicemail. Every call after that went straight to voicemail. Brandon's phone had either died, been destroyed, or been turned off. Brandon Swanson had vanished. When investigators finally took the case seriously and began tracing Brandon's movements, they made a discovery that changed everything. Brandon hadn't been between Marshall and Lind at all. Using cell phone tower data, they determined that Brandon's final location was near Taunton, Minnesota, 25 miles northeast of where he told his parents he was, and in the completely opposite direction from his intended route home. Think about that. Brandon, who had driven these roads his entire life, wasn't just slightly off course. He was catastrophically lost in an area that made no sense given where he was supposed to be going. How does a local kid, driving familiar roads, end up 25 miles in the wrong direction? And how does he become so disoriented that he doesn't realize where he is? The massive search that followed involved over 400 volunteers, search dogs, aircraft, dive teams, and ground-penetrating radar. They combed through abandoned wells, grain silos, rivers, and thousands of acres of farmland. They found nothing. Not a trace of Brandon Swanson or any clue about what happened to him. The drowning theory the Yellow Medicine River was running high and fast due to spring runoff that night, with water depths reaching 10 feet in some areas. Many believe Brandon fell in and was swept away by the current. But here's the problem. Search dogs never picked up Brandon's scent near any water. Professional dive teams searched extensively. And if he had simply fallen into water, how did he have time to say, "Oh shit," before going under? The hidden danger theory rural Minnesota is filled with unmarked hazards, abandoned wells, grain silos, old machinery. Some believe Brandon fell into one of these traps in the darkness. This theory explains his final words. Maybe he saw the danger just before it was too late. But exhaustive searches of every farm structure in the area found nothing. The foul play theory, this is the theory that keeps investigators awake at night. What if Brandon encountered someone with malicious intent during his walk through the darkness? The timing of his final words suggests he saw something unexpected and alarming. Something that made him realize he was in immediate danger. But in rural Minnesota at 2:30 a.m., who would be out there? The medical episode theory, some experts believe Brandon may have suffered a medical emergency or extreme disorientation that caused his confusion about his location. Hypothermia can cause erratic behavior and poor decision-making. But Brandon had only been walking for about an hour, and the temperature was around 40 degrees, cold, but not immediately life-threatening. 16 years later, Brian and Annette Swanson have never stopped searching for their son. They've established missing person funds, pushed for legislative changes, and continue to follow every lead. In 2013, their efforts led to Brandon's Law in Minnesota, requiring law enforcement to immediately investigate missing person cases regardless of the person's age. But no amount of legislation can fill the void left by Brandon's disappearance. The family continues to search, to hope, and to ask the question that haunts everyone familiar with this case. What did Brandon see in those final moments that made him say, "Oh shit"? Was it the ground giving way beneath his feet? Was it a person approaching in the darkness? Was it something else entirely, something we haven't even considered? Brandon Swanson disappeared after driving his car into a ditch and remaining on the phone with his parents for 47 minutes. But the evidence raises more questions than answers. How do you become so lost in an area you know well? How do you end up 25 miles from where you think you are? And what happens to make you suddenly cry out in alarm before vanishing forever? The prairie of southwestern Minnesota stretches endlessly in all directions, holding its secrets beneath waves of corn and soybeans. Somewhere in that landscape, Brandon Swanson took his last steps as a free man, or perhaps his last steps at all. His disappearance reminds us that in our modern, connected world, it's still possible to simply vanish without a trace. And sometimes, the most terrifying disappearances happen not in dark alleys or dangerous cities, but on familiar roads, just miles from home. The darkness reveals its secrets slowly, but it always reveals them. If this story found you in the shadows, subscribe and let me know in the comments. What truth do you think we missed? Until the next case goes cold, stay vigilant.